This week's film is an absolutely underrated and largely overlooked masterpiece of filmmaking from the 1970s. It's Sorcerer, which is a 1977 American thriller directed by William Friedkin. Having had a troubled production, it bombed on release both critically and commercially before receiving a critical reappraisal in later years. So why did this bomb, and why is it actually quite brilliant? Why it bombed first. Originally conceived as a side project to tie Friedkin over until his next big project, The Devil's Triangle, a follow-up to The Exorcist was ready to move forward, with that movie never materialising, it was decided to make this his next big release and boost the budget from the originally envisioned $2.5 million to $15 million. Now, William Friedkin is many things. A genius filmmaker amongst them, he's also an insane perfectionist who is almost impossible to work with, the kind of director who would blow up a bus full of schoolchildren repeatedly if he thought it would give him the perfect shot for his film. So it will come as no surprise that this film also had a troubled shoot, with Friedkin insisting on filming in various real-world locations in 3 of the 4 corners of the globe, and demanding that stunts, such as the car crash scene, be shot and reshot 13 times. Hell, he even demanded the explosion in Jerusalem be redone, even though the original blew out windows in surrounding buildings and injured a stuntman. This led to a number of on-set problems between Friedkin and various members of cast and crew. In fact, 50 crew members were hospitalized via injuries and sickness, and Friedkin himself lost 23 kilograms in weight. As Tim Applegate concluded, Friedkin took his camera crew to the jungle and never quite returned. All of this meant the original budget of $15 million ballooned to $22 million. Then the film released opposite Star Wars, while simultaneously being critically savaged by almost everyone because, and I quote, "Why would anyone want to spend $20 million on a remake of The Wages of Fear, do it badly, and give it a misleading title is anybody's guess. The result is dire. Because yes, this is a somewhat remake of the 1950s classic Wages of Fear, a film I don't think I've ever seen, so can't really comment on whether this is a bad remake or not. I can, however, say this is a fantastic film in its own right. I had seen this many years ago, and I wasn't probably ever going to cover it on this channel, but a viewer requested it, so here it is. If you want to request a movie, let me know in the comments. This for me is the kind of film that could never exist again. The kind of film that could only really have existed in the late 1970s in fact, where a studio gave a big budget and total creative freedom to an auteur visionary director and just let them loose, and what you end up with is a piece of masterful filmmaking. Or more to the point, having done some research into the making of this film, the director is such a madman, he just throws studio executives off set and demands total control anyway. The production issues I think actually add to the film in a way that you'd never have been able to capture on a set. The plot is a tension-filled character study essentially split into 4 parts. The opening part is a prologue, itself split into 4 vignettes, with each vignette telling the backstory of our 4 protagonists. We open with Nilo in Veracruz, Mexico, where he assassinates a man in his apartment before calmly strolling out and into the street. The second introduces us to Qasim, a Palestinian in Jerusalem who happens to have just committed a terrorist bombing. The IDF show up, who either capture or kill his 3 conspirators, as the scene ends panning into his face. As he helplessly watches on, we cut to the next vignette, where we meet Victor Manzon, a high-flying banker from Paris, who is in short order given 24 hours to provide collateral to cover losses his bank has suffered due to fraudulent activity. Of course he fails and his business partner ends up taking his own life, as Victor flees, leaving his wife alone in a restaurant. There is something fairly notable to mention about the first 3 vignettes, in that they have no English language in them, with all dialogue being in the native language of the location, so Spanish, Arabic and French in the main. This actually led to people walking out on the film on initial release, as audiences thought that the film was a foreign language one, with no English being spoken in the first 15 or so minutes. The film is actually an attempt by Friedkin to tell a story visually rather than verbally, so the vignettes are the only part of the film that has a huge amount of dialogue anyway, with the rest of the film relying on strong visuals to portray the narrative. The last vignette is in Elizabeth, New Jersey, where a crew of armed robbers rob a church and shoot a priest before getting away with the money. They crash their car into a truck, and only Jackie Scanlon, our final protagonist, is able to get up and flee the crash, the rest either being dead or extremely injured. So you might have noticed that every single character is in fact an asshole. One's an assassin, one's a terrorist, even worse, one's a banker, never mind his actual crimes of fraud, and another is a bank robber. Usually this would make the protagonist difficult to relate to, but the fact they are assholes is really important to the narrative in parts 2 and 3. Part 2 is where the film really hits its stride, where our 4 misfits all end up in some podunk Central American town, and everything looks like utter shit. That would usually be a sentence that was uttered as a negative, but here it is absolutely a positive. Everything oozes dirt and filth and squalor, including our 4 leads, who have all to a man gone from well-dressed suited and booted gents to dirty, grimy and oily down and outs, all struggling to make ends meet, doing dead-end menial tasks in this dead-end dump of a town. They all look thoroughly disgusting and miserable. Whenever they are on screen, they have a sheen of sweat and grime on them. I'd say it was great acting, but I think it was because they were just that dirty and miserable in reality. That's not to say the acting on show isn't top notch, because it absolutely is. Everyone here gives an exceptional performance. Originally, Friedkin wanted Steve McQueen for the lead role, but he made demands that Friedkin was unwilling to meet, so he dropped out, eventually being replaced by Roy Scheider. This was the same for every part other than Amidou, who played Kasim the terrorist, who was the only first choice actor that Friedkin got. Either way, all 4 actors involved give magnificent performances. All of this, however, does highlight the almost documentary feel this film has. It really does at times feel like a film crew just followed these 4 guys around for several months, and this movie is the edited together footage. During part 2 we learn a little bit about the political backstory of this country and town. It's your almost cliched Central American banana republic, deeply corrupt and in reality run by the American corporations who exploit the people and country's resources for the benefit of themselves and El Presidente. I say it's cliched. Well, it would be if it wasn't essentially just a historical fact. Most Central American countries went through this at some point from the 1950s until the 1990s. Of course, there's a group of rebels who destroy an oil well that the American corporation has to have so that they can hit their yearly profit targets. The resulting oil head fire can only be put out via explosives, which, as it turns out, the explosives are so dangerous they could explode with a single jolt, and they are 200 miles from the fire. Which brings us to part 3, the journey from the town to the oil well, where our 4 protagonists have to learn to work together so that they can have even a remote chance of survival. This is where the genius of having all of the main characters be utter assholes comes into play. They are in fact such assholes that Nilo murders somebody so that he can take his place on the crew as a driver, as it's his only shot of getting enough money and the papers needed to get out of this town and country. The fact they are so clearly selfish and self-centered makes the journey and them having to learn to work together more impactful, because we've seen previously that these people care only about themselves and nothing else. Had they been just normal dudes, then of course you'd expect them to just work together to achieve their common goal, because that's what normal people do. But these guys are utter assholes, so the entire journey is just one where the tension is constantly being ratcheted up as they battle themselves and the elements. The scene where they cross a suspension bridge during a tropical storm at night has to be seen to be believed. Nowadays they do it all via CGI and green screen, and it would be about as impactful as a 3-month-old punching you in the face. But here you can absolutely tell they went out and filmed a real truck crossing a real bridge in a jungle. In fact, the bridge cost $1 million and was of a highly complex construction, so that the production crew could make its way. Originally, they built the bridge in the Dominican Republic, but the river underneath became entirely dry due to a drought, so they moved the bridge to Mexico at a cost of another $1 million, where that river also became a trickle. Seeing as they had no budget to move it again, they had to recreate the torrent of water and storms required for the shot with helicopters and wind machines. It's probably a good thing that the river dried up, as the truck actually slid off the bridge into the river on 5 occasions, often with an actor in it. The scene took 3 months to film, and is, according to Friedkin himself, the most difficult he had ever filmed. The fourth and final part of this movie is an epilogue, and it wraps up the story in a nice neat little bow, and I don't want to spoil what happens to any of our band of miscreants, so I urge you to just watch the film and find out. All whilst this amazing feast of visual, almost documentary filmmaking is going on, the soundtrack is also an awesome one, being produced by Tangerine Dream, their first soundtrack of many they did for Hollywood. One last little note on why this movie is called Sorcerer. It was due to one of the trucks also being named Sorcerer. Friedkin had noticed that a lot of trucks in Ecuador had names painted on the front of them when he travelled there to do research for the film and wanted to recreate this. Not that you can actually see the name under all the dirt and grime in the actual film. One truck was called Lazaro after Lazarus, and the other Sorcerer, which is a fairly silly name for a film that has absolutely no mystical elements, and is in reality a tension film, almost documentary style character study of a thriller, but I'd argue is one of the great masterpieces of late 70s filmmaking, a period in Hollywood history for the first and until now only time that visionary filmmakers were given complete artistic control over their films, resulting in some of the best cinema ever released. Just a shame it didn't always mean box office success. I, of course, highly recommend Sorcerer to you, and if you've made it this far into the video, then please let me know what you think in the comments, and drop a like, and even maybe subscribe if you aren't already.